Michael Mamas, and I'm here with Scott Davalos today. Scotty is in Seattle, Washington today. Hey, Scotty, how's it going?
Good.
I don't know. Probably a lot of the listeners don't know that Scott had the opportunity for years to study with Chakapani Ulao, who is for years. I mean, he's passed away now, but he was certainly the most recognized Jyotishi in the United States for many years, and he has quite an impressive history. He studied with Swami Nityananda. I don't know if many of you know who Nityananda was, but he was an incredible saint in India. How long was Chakapani with Nityananda, Scotty? Do you know?
Wow, from the time he was a boy, and that's when he really got introduced to him. He used to talk about how Nityananda really liked children, and he would come around and he would go get to sit in his lap, and just so I don't know how long, but it was from the time he was a boy,
Huh.
Yeah.
And you had some funny story about him, how he had to cross a river to go see Nityananda, or what was that?
Yeah, there's all sorts of funny stories about him and train tickets, and like he'd like to ride on trains. And one time that they had a new conductor and he didn't have a ticket, and so they were going to kick him off the train because it was a new conductor that didn't know him. And so he's like, okay, here's tickets, and he just started producing like hundreds and hundreds of tickets just started coming out and stuff. He said Chakapani said he could turn day into night. He was that powerful, Yeah.
Yeah, Nityananda was for sure. He was the real deal. He was with Muktananda. He was Swami Muktananda's master. And then
Right.
I know that Chakapani had he would have lunch with Maharishi and Muktananda together, the three of them. That would have been fun to sit in on that,
Yeah. Muktananda is how Chakapani got to the United States.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, Muktananda moved to, I think it was somewhere in the Bay Area, I think Oakland or Berkeley, somewhere in there. And then he brought him over to be his Jyotishi,
No kidding.
So, yeah.
Isn't that funny, all these years, and I just find that out now,
Yeah.
Yeah. I liked Chakapani, I didn't see, I just saw him a handful of times. I saw him in San Francisco, and I saw him in LA at his home, and a few things like that.
Yeah.
But you spent a lot of time with him,
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
At any rate, what's that?
He has some great stories about, even just doing readings for like Michael Jackson,
Schwarzenegger, I understand.
Schwarzenegger, the Black Panthers up in the Bay Area.
Really?
So somehow he said he was like scared because they came in and they had all these guns and stuff, and you see little Chakapani and he's got to deal with these guys. Pressure, he said. It was amazing.
To my experience, oftentimes people think that a Jyotishi is good if he gives them good news. But if he doesn't give them good news, they don't think he's a very good Jyotishi,
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. But at any rate, what we're going to talk about today, the title is Something Dramatic is About to Happen. And, we've been talking about that for a long time, really, Scotty, on these podcasts, and we talked about how there was a Jyotishi with Maharshi. This was back in the 90s. I've talked about this before. And he was saying that the very first signs of this transition that so many are predicting, this transition into an enlightened age, will very start when a man with orange hair is president of the United States. And of course, didn't say if it was because of him or in spite of him, but nevertheless, that's what they said. And that was back in the 90s. And then also this thing about this is December 20th, 2020. Now, tomorrow, the 21st, is a astronomical configuration that hasn't taken place The last time it happened was 400 years ago. And it was around that time, that was right before the time when Genghis Khan passed away. And I don't know, a lot of people make the connection. I don't know. But the thing is, you see, Saturn goes through a sign every like 2.5 years, Jupiter about once a year, like that. And so, Saturn's moving more slowly than Jupiter, but Jupiter catches up, but only once every 60 years does it catch up in Capricorn. And but now something that hasn't happened for 400 years is also happening, and that is that Jupiter and Capricorn, when you look at two planets, they could be at the same degree in the horizon, but one is above the other. Here they're the same degree, but one is above the other. But what's going to be happening is tomorrow, Jupiter and Saturn are going to be at the same degree, but right on top of each other at a point value. And that hasn't happened in 400 years. So a lot of, there are going to be a lot of telescopes focused on that, because you'll see both the planets like right next to each other, superimposed, and you'll see all their moons. It should be pretty interesting, And then the astrologers are attributing that to a really transformational time. And that correlates to these predictions that December, 2020 is going to be the time of a major transition from more of an age of ignorance and strife. And boy, don't we have a lot of that strife going on right now? I mean, just think about it. There's global warming, climate change, there's the political conflicts, now there's the cyber attacks. I mean, something's going to happen. Something dramatic is going to happen. And that indication is there on the Jupiter and Saturn conjunction. Now, Jupiter is debilitated in Capricorn. Saturn is in its own sign extremely strong in Capricorn. And they're right on top of each other. And when two planets are even within 1 degree, that's called a planetary war. But now, it seems every single Jyotishi, has different theory about what happens during planetary wars. Which planet wins, they both get affected for sure, but what the predicted outcome will be. And the same with this planetary war now. People aren't really sure. But there's another thing that happens when an exalted or planet in its own sign is in the same sign with a debilitated planet, as is going on now with strong Saturn and debilitated Jupiter. That's called Anicca Yoga. In other words, the debilitation of Jupiter is canceled, but it's not just black and white canceled. It's just kind of given a spin. It's kind of like doing a triple gainer backflip off the high knuckle board. Where's it going to land? And so it could actually produce some really fabulous results, And why are we talking about all this, really? Because, see, there's a more important reason to talk about Jyotish than trying to predict what's going to happen in the future. I haven't seen any Jyotishis that are very good at predicting what's going to happen in the future, especially when they get into the fine details. That's why I think the best thing to do with Jyotish, look at the slow-moving planets, because they're in a sign long enough to have a significant effect. Moon flies through a sign in 2.5 days, so it isn't really given time to deliver any kind of effect, be it good or bad. It just whizzes right through. But Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu, and Ketu, they're in signs for a long time. And so if you just look at those 4 planets, your predictions are going to be more consistent and more grounded, Scotty, what do you think about the well, we can just use this as an example, okay? Just how interpreting these things is difficult. Because let's say you got a debilitated Jupiter. Okay, Jupiter is the king. Jupiter is the ruler. Jupiter is also expansion and kind of abundance, you could say. So we could look at let's say that you are, let's say you're a Democrat and you look at it and you look at debilitated Jupiter. What are you going to say? Oh yeah, we got a leader, Jupiter, the king, so to speak, a leader that's not a good guy. That's what they would say. And then they would say that Saturn, which is focused and disciplined, Saturn is going to straighten the mess out. Saturn is going to step in there, which would mean, from a liberal's perspective, the Democrats are going to step in, get us back on the straight and narrow and get us going right. That could be an interpretation. But now if you're a Republican, what are you going to say? You might say that, these Democrats are so expansive. Jupiter's an expansive energy. And so they would attribute that to the Democrats. They would say they're wanting to give money away and everything's free this, free that. And whereas the Republicans are the disciplined ones, the Saturn influence, you see. And they're the ones that have to get things back on the straight and narrow. So if this huge transition, if this dramatic change that's going to be taking place, how it's going to look would be very different depending on your political stance. And that goes with everything. Jyotish interpretations are like, they're like traversing the razor's edge, and you can follow one side or follow the other side very easily, depending on your bias, Scotty, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think that's the problem. Is it's not the Jyotish so much. It's what's the awareness or what's the capability of the person that's looking at it. And Chakapani always said that. It's like this isn't, you have to be like really tuned in to be able to discern what is and what isn't, not based on biases or this or that, but based on what's really happening. And it's like right now in Capricorn, Saturn is considered a benefic in Capricorn, obviously, but in Jupiter is considered a malefic. So,
and that's from one perspective, but then on the other side, Saturn is strong, so it's depending on what house it's in, it could empower you.
Yeah.
Whereas Jupiter's debilitated, so it could be excess of not good things.
Right. So there's variables that are involved it's so subtle that who has the real capability of doing that. And Chakapani always said, this isn't the time there aren't those people. He even said for himself, that's one of the things I loved about him was the humility that he had. He's like, he never told you like this is going to happen or this isn't going to happen. These are the influences that are coming at you, and based on the entirety of your makeup, is going to determine how that's going to affect you. So all we can do is say these are the forces that are coming at you. You understand that a little bit more. You have awareness. You see which things. That's why certain things ring true. I remember hearing things in different Jyotishis talking about things, and some things resonate. Some things are like, wow, that's way off. Because it's it's such a complex multivariable equation that that's Chakapani always used to say too. They used to stick with the Jyotishi families for generations. You know what I mean? Like, so that they learned. He used to say also, do you deserve to hear what I'm about to tell you? And then he established the relationship. And when you establish that relationship with the Jyotishi over time, he can look deeper and deeper and find more and more and more about you and the subtleties and the nuances and all of that too. So
Yeah, I feel like Pundaji, the pundit that we have here
Yeah.
at the Mount Summit, he's a really great Jyotishi. And I think the main reason is because he keeps things in perspective. And there's an important thing I've always talked about Jyotish is it's weighting. How much weight do you put on moon translating a sign? How much weight do you put on somebody's birth chart, which means where the planets were the moment you were born? It's called Rashi chart. How much weight do you put on the moon chart? In other words, you take the Rashi chart, wherever the moon is, you kind of spin the chart around and make it the first house. And then you look at all the transits. What are transits? Transits are like where the planets are, not when you were born, but where they are now. And so you kind of superimpose them on your moon chart and read it that way. And really, the Rashi chart is only about 40% of the chart. The rest is the moon chart with the transits. But see, then you can go a lot deeper with that. Every year, and it takes them 3 months to do this. Every year, Punjaji calculates out the Ugadis. And there's a different Ugadi. Ugadi is a complex calculation based upon a whole bunch of different factors. And it's for each moon chart, for each moon ascendant, for each moon sign, the sign the moon is in, there's a different Ugadi reading. And that is a huge component to the chart. But very few Jyotishis even know about that, let alone know how to calculate it. And it takes him 3 months just to do the calculations to get through all 12 signs, along with his other responsibilities and duties, you know. And then there's another thing that goes even deeper than that Jyotishis don't know about. And that is that for each planet, you can calculate, and it changes from year to year. Take, for example, Saturn. Is Saturn gold? Is it silver? Is it bronze, or is it lead? I think, I can't remember. Gold, silver, and two others. But the point is, if it's gold, you're going to get mostly great results. If it's the other end of the spectrum, you're going to get not good results. Very few Jyotishis know how to calculate that. Very few Jyotishis even know about it. But those things which I just gave, 40% Rashi chart, 60% moon chart with transits, including the Ugadi and the gold silver thing, those are the main things. Those are the things you weight the most. But I mean no disrespect, because it's good to look at, and I appreciate that they do it. But a lot of Jyotishis will send out a monthly newsletter, and they'll say, okay, moon is here, and that's what this means, and Mars is here, and that's what this means, and between this date and that date, you know, Mars is here, and then it transits to the next thing, and that's what that means. And you really need to be careful that you don't weight those things improperly, because then you lose the trees or the forest, when really what you want with Jyotish is the big picture. And in fact, if you can get the big picture, and you're doing great. And the big picture is really more about major tendencies, even with respect to a person's birth chart, their Rashi chart. You get a major thrust, a major feel for the chart. And getting too far into details, a lot of times it gets you off track because you start weighting things too much, you know. But now, with this Jupiter-Saturn thing going on, right on the same point, in fact, right in the evening, right after the sun goes down, if you look in the southwestern sky, you'll see a bright star, which is Jupiter, and Saturn is going to be touching right next to it. And I'm looking forward to going out and looking at that. It's incredible, you know, and it's been 400 years since that happened, when Genghis Khan died. But now here's another thing. That happened, and Genghis Khan, if my calculations are right, he didn't die for another, I think, 8 or 9 months, Scotty.
Right.
But like Chakapani used to say, Saturn's influence, it's more like, what did he say, Scott? It's more like it kind of clings, and it kind of moves gradually,
Yeah.
And it's not like these things aren't on-off switches. Oh, it transited on this day and therefore boom. And
Right.
there might be a boom tomorrow, but we may not notice really the effects of it for a long time. In fact, even when they were saying that, and there's a lot of stuff about this in the Vedic literature, that this is the time of this transition, you know. But just because the transition is marked by this transit, by this conjunction tomorrow, we may not see the results of it for several years. In fact, because it's Saturn, which moves so slowly, probably it's going to take place gradually over the next several years. Scotty, anything to say about that?
Right.
Do you remember,
Yeah, that's
what was it, the chakapani? How did he describe Saturn in that way? I can't remember.
well, he talked about Saturn. Just it reminds me of when you talked about that big tar ball or whatever that you can stick on your hand, you know, and you try to shake it off or whatever, and it just
just kind of clings
slow and you can't get it off. Or I remember you talking about the remains of ignorance or something, something avidya or Laishavidya.
Yeah, Laishavidya, the remains of ignorance, kind of the same thing.
Right. Yeah. Just you try to get that big tar ball off your hand, and
it's actually a good point, because they say, you know, I think people get the idea that this is a little tangential, but when you get enlightened, all of a sudden it's like boom, you know, and all of a sudden everything's great and peachy. It's not like that. First of all, it's almost disorienting. It's like, what the heck happened, you know? And it can take years to work through that. There are even stories, I think it was Ramana Maharshi, I'm not sure, or Ramakrishna, I can't remember who it was. But when he got enlightened, he was basically dysfunctional for 2 years. They had to feed him and everything. You know?
Yeah.
That's rare. More commonly, you're kind of out of it for a while, but it's a dramatic shift. But the point then too is there's this thing called Laishavidya, the remains of ignorance. So even in the best of times, in the best of transitions, even though the shift has happened, there's going to be kind of like this flywheel momentum effect of kind of a level of life that you're so accustomed to living that it just kind of keeps going, and the remains are there for a while until you kind of work through it, you know. Yeah.
I was just looking at something, Michael, from one of what things that Chakapani is going over with me, and he talked about how Saturn will act on its positive side, especially with a strong Jupiter. If it's positioned in this, you know, with Jupiter, it talks about how the native can become a ruler and will hold an important office, something to that effect. Talking about like in somebody's chart.
You know, all those things are razor's edges, aren't they, Scotty?
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, you've got two diametrically opposed forces. One is strict and disciplined Saturn, the other is expansive and all giving, the other is disciplining through hard knocks, you know. Right. And how those two things come together, the possibilities are really endless.
Yeah.
But there is a possibility. Can you imagine if you have both of those values working together and supporting one another? Yeah, you could accomplish great things. You know,
it's like you talk about the physics and the psychology, the two sides of the coin. It seems like, you know, the Jupiter and the Saturn are the two sides of the, you know, the political coin that need to be together. You know, can't.
Yeah, if they it's a great example. If they would work together, it could be great. But if they're working against each other, it could be a real problem. You know.
Right.
Yeah. What I would say about it is that based on our knowledge of Jyotish, and something major is going to happen. This is going to be a time of big transition. You may not see it immediately, but the next few years are going to be huge. Now, did we say anything having said that, did we just say anything that really you need Jyotish to say? I mean, with everything going on in the political arena, everything that's going on between China and the United States, the virus, the global warming, climate change, all that. We're at a time of huge transition without having to even think about Jyotish, you know.
Mhm.
But I think we can take comfort in the, I do at any rate, in the idea that, you know, in the Veda, it's been predicting 5,000 years ago, is according to the Veda, what was it? Lord Krishna told Mother Divine that this is the time of the transition into an enlightened era. And we see the potential for that too. But, you know, I had a professor, we're sitting here trying to you know, reveal the course of existence through astrology, through Jyotish. A lot easier thing to predict, you would think, would be the course of the economy. But economists, even the greatest economists in the world, can't do that. And what happens is one economist, he predicts something and he's right on one thing. And then he becomes famous and he's hot and he puts out a newsletter and gets rich. And his next prediction turns out to not be right, you know? And so now we might get to the point, well, why then are we even studying Jyotish? Well, if for no other reason, it's because it's the mechanic of creation. You know, everything maps. I'm the unified field. You're the unified field. What's going on the other side of the moon right now maps onto the unified field. Kind of like what Newton said, if you understand a grain of sand, you understand the whole universe. It's sort of like that. And so by understanding the mechanics of Jyotish, you're understanding the underlying mechanics of existence and how that maps on to everything in creation. So even if it's too difficult to wait at all, just by starting to think in those terms and look at things and understand things in those terms, it gets you kind of out of this sort of valuable but nevertheless narrow way of approaching problems and understanding things that really we've been indoctrinated into doing. And I'm not knocking that. Look what we've come up with, you know, electric lights, cameras, microphones, television, automobiles, rocket ships. So that kind of thinking does have a huge value, obviously. But nevertheless, there's so much more. It's such a thin little slice through the pie. And by expanding our awareness to thinking in terms that are more in harmony with the language not of that humans have created, but the language of nature, we start to open up more and more to the full potential of our own true nature. And really, I think that's the greatest value of studying Jyotish, you know. And at the same time, it is good to know, if nothing else, like Scott was saying, it's almost like you know what the weather is going to be. You get a weather forecast. What's going to happen? Well, it depends on if the forecast is for rain. It depends on whether or not you have an umbrella, you know. But nevertheless, it does give you some feel for the trends in that kind of more of an abstract sense. Is that? I think that was well said, huh, Scotty? That conveys it.
Oh yeah, for sure. You know, I was just thinking as you were talking about it, is that like you talk about the funnel, and that funnel goes deeper, you know, so you've got those broad strokes up on top, but if you have the ability to go deeper and deeper and deeper to those finer points that could go down, but that's the issue, is that I think now we need to, these are the influences and we need to stay open. And you know, sometimes that weather, you know, passes us to the north just a little bit, you know, and because we don't know those subtle things that are deeper down that are influencing it, makes it miss us versus hammering us or
It's a
whatever.
good point too. There's so many components to it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be a very subtle component that makes a huge difference, you know.
Right.
But one other thing that I think is really good to mention is something called Jyotish Pragya. It's the idea that Ritam, it's the idea that imagine, and Scotty kind of touched on this. Chakapani said there aren't people like that around available anymore, but imagine if the awareness was so refined and so cultured that a person could tap into all that and speak from that place, not by analyzing, okay, Jupiter's here and Saturn is there, but just by that finest feeling level, intuitive. That's what real intuition is, that intuitive felt sense. And you just touch into it, and there it is. I remember I used to do Jyotish charts for people. I don't do it anymore, really, sometimes, but not often. And I remember, and Scott, you probably have this experience too. You're working on a Jyotish chart, you look at this, you consider that, and at some point, it's almost like you, for lack of a better word, you transcend on the chart. It's almost like all the pieces somehow come together and it just clicks, and it almost feels like, I got them.
Mm.
Now I see them. I found them.
Yeah.
Within myself, kind of a thing. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I would, you know, I had the fortune of being able to go in and watch Chakapani do, you know, reading after reading after reading after reading, you know, and you know, sometimes people would, I remember hearing, you know, other students and stuff talk about, God, it just seems like he's spacing out or something sometimes or whatever. And I was like, no, what he's doing is he's feeling in, he's dropping in to try to, understand you, you know.
It's almost like they use the chart as a portal to go
Yeah.
through in order to find the person within their own self.
Right.
Now, I remember a dear friend of mine, Dr. Shen, he was a Chinese doctor, and he was world famous for doing pulse evaluations. And I'd go see him in his office on Fifth Avenue, Manhattan, and we became good friends. We'd go out to lunch, or he had me at his house. He lived up in Stamford, Connecticut. But it wouldn't be rare at all to go in there and somebody from Holland was sitting with him one day, just watch him. They paid a lot of money just to watch him take pulses. People from Hong Kong, from all over, they come and just watch him take pulses. And he had some, just on a daily basis, he would do things like he took this one guy's pulse, and he told him in 3 months, he said, you're going to incur a major trauma. He said, so, prepare yourself. And this guy was a stockbroker. 3 months later, the stock market crashed. The guy lost everything. And, that's just one example. But he and I became close friends. I get emotional when I think about it. He's passed away now. But I remember once we were sitting at lunch, actually, and I said, Dr. Shen, you do all these incredible readings for people, but every time you take my pulse, which is often, you just give me some herbs and that's it. I said, what do you see on a deeper level like that when you take my pulse? So it was funny because we were sitting right across the table at lunch, and he kind of squinted and kind of looked at me. And then he told me, and what he said, yeah, he was right. So it turned out, but, and it was all good. But I said, Dr. Shen, how do you do that? And he said, I don't know. Which I thought that was pretty cool, He just, it just comes to him. Now, there was one man, his name was Vashishta, and he runs an ashram in India, and he only has he never leaves the ashram. It's strictly Indian males that are his disciples in the ashram, very traditional in that sense. But for a brief period of time, for just a few months, he came out and he spoke. And I was just lucky enough that I was there. And he was amazing because he would talk about the number 5, and then he would talk about maybe Jupiter, and then he would talk about, I don't know, anything. And they were just all these unrelated things. And your head would just be spinning, made sense to him, but why? Because he speaks in the language of nature. It's a language of abstraction. It's not A to B to C. It's a mosaic all at once, and that's the language of nature, and that's how he functioned. But somehow, just sitting there every day listening to him, it kind of did something. It rearranged your brain. You started thinking in a more, I would say, cosmic, if you will, sense. But the amazing thing about this guy is that I remember once we just wanted to see the potential of this guy's awareness. This is real Jyotish, because it's not about the piece of paper. It's about accessing into the depth of your being. And so I remember somebody once asked one of his disciples a question. He looked at him, and the disciple looked at him, a friend of mine, and he said, "Why are you asking me?" He said, "Ask vashishta." He said, "Do you want to know what's going on the other side of Mars?" He said, "Ask vashishta," you know. But at any rate, we gave him the name of, it was actually a doctor who was there, just gave him the name of a guy who was sick. And they couldn't figure out what was wrong. And so he said, but the thing is, it was his, I mean, he could be sitting there reading the Sunday paper, kicked back, you know, just like if we would be having a cup of coffee together in the morning or something like that. And so they throw out a name. They didn't tell him anything. They just threw out a name, and he would just start talking freely. "Oh yeah, that guy." He said, they think he has this problem, but he doesn't. The problem is actually this. But he said, but they're going to figure it out, and then he'll be fine. And sure enough, that happens. And he just did stuff like that all the time. And what was really incredible about it was just the nonchalant nature with which he did it. You know. Now, his whole purpose of his course was to teach us nadi vigyan, which is pulse evaluation, how to find things like that in a person's pulse. And then actually, when I had my school, I used to teach people how to do nadi vigyan. And you'd be surprised. There's a technique to it, which I would say we know a lot more than we give ourselves credit for, except that we get in our own way. Kind of like Scotty was talking about with respect to reading people's charts. We have our projections, we have our biases, even our biases about what we don't know, what we can't do. And that gets in our way of actually doing it. I remember once I taught different things in my classes to try to help people, you know, get over that hump, so to speak. And so once I broke the group up into a group A and a group B. And I said, okay, group A's, you stay back there, and group B's come up here. I want to talk to you privately. And so I told group B's, okay, you're going to give, each of you is going to give one individual in the other group a reading. And all I want you to do is fake it. Just pretend like you are really, really, really good at tapping into a person. Just pretend like you're really great at it, and then go ahead and give them a reading. And so they did it, and everybody was astounded by how great they were at it. And the people that were getting the reading, like, yeah, that's right. You know, how did you know I had a brother? And how did you know he was in college or whatever? And just across the board like that. And so it was just to illustrate the point that if you can just get past your own encumbrances, we have a lot more intuitive sense than we think. But then after we did that, and then I brought both groups together and I told them what we did after they gave feedback about how great it was. And you know, the interesting thing was, Scotty, they were upset about it. They got mad.
Yeah.
They thought, I guess they thought I fooled them or tricked them or made fools of them or something like that. And so it's kind of, they missed the point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The point was that we have these abilities, but how do we get out of our own way? How do we get, and that's life in general. In my previous podcast, I talked about projection versus perception, you know, and how we project onto more than we perceive. And our world is built upon our projections, really. And how do we work through that? How do we start to perceive more and project less, you know? But this vashishta guy, boy, he was amazing. And it was just so natural for him, so effortless, so normal, you know? Yeah. So having said that, tomorrow at 1:30 in the afternoon, East Coast time here, is when that transit is going to happen, or when Jupiter and Saturn are right on top of each other. And So number of hours after that, after the sun sets, you'll be able to see them in the southwest sky. I'm definitely going to look if the sky is clear. And it is a major astronomical and also astrological event. And we're going to see some changes. And one might ask, is it going to be a change for the good, or if it's going to be a change for the bad? And I think to a great degree, the truth of that matter is going to have a lot to do with what side of the fence you're on, you know? Yeah, just going back to the Democrat-Republican thing, for example. If Biden, gets inaugurated and that, oh, it was good if people are Democrat. If, these Republicans are trying to reverse the election and all that, and if that happened, then the Democrats will think it's bad, And so many things in life are kind of like that. It's going to depend on the side of the fence you're on, But I do think that the net gain for the world in the long term, it's going to be good. So we just have to hang in there. It could happen very quickly, or it could be more like Saturn and the tar baby and kind of gradual, but certainly over the next few years, all indications are that things are going to get better for the world. Anything to add, Scotty, before we close?
No, it's an exciting time, right now.
It is well said. It is an exciting time. Yeah. Can you imagine? You just want to live longer to see what the world is like in another 50 years, It's going to be incredible. Technologically, spiritually, we're in for a great transformation spiritually, for sure, And I talk about that in my podcast all the time, the nature of that thing, the integration of the rational with the spiritual. Spirituality isn't going out the top of your head, it's getting connected above and below, like that. Anyway, those are other tangents we'll talk about some other time. So nice talking with you all, and we'll see you again next week. I got some questions here. Let me see. Okay, they're good. They've already been responded to without even trying. Okay, thanks very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.